got to say, it was a joy to be outside in the crisp morning air. I was up early because I go to the gym most days now. I'm there before 6. And I got there, and yesterday we'd had a lot of wind. And the power failed yesterday. And apparently the gym's heating system is run by a computer. And that computer was convinced that it was somewhere in December. And it must have been below 0 outside, because it must have been 85 degrees in the building. I knew there was something up when I found all the doors open and the fans blowing. And it was really nice when I was done to get back into nature's temperature in the 50s. It was such a relief. So, we're going to talk about nature today. We're going to talk about the world around us and our part in it. How many of you love storytelling? Love to hear a good story? Just raise your hands if you like this. Yeah. Now, where's the best places for story? Is it, around the campfire in the summer? Is it after a good meal sitting around the table? You know, wherever it is. I've heard some great stories in both of those places. But wherever it is, it's usually where people feel safe and feel relaxed, and they can talk with each other, and they can trust each other to tell these stories. Some of them get pretty ridiculous. I think my favorite thing in later life, when my brother and I were both adults, were to be sitting at the dining room table and tell some ridiculous story that would make my mother laugh. She usually, when we were little, I said, behave yourself at the table. It's like, oh, it was so much fun just to tell some crazy story about what my brother and I had gotten up to, things my parents didn't know that we'd gotten up to, and just get her busting out laughing. Storytelling, it's amazing. It's how we define ourselves, it's how we connect with each other, it's how we know and are known. It's even how we practice different scenarios in our lives before we have to live them out. That's why stories of suspense and spookiness are so popular, because before you ever have to deal with something scary in your life, you can have read up on it. And you can see how you can practice, basically, a little bit in advance. So, we have the story in Genesis now. And it tells us about our true life with God and with each other. And Leviticus adds to it. It adds a nurturing component for handling each other. And the story in Genesis, its meaning has been almost lost in modern times because we've gotten into some very silly arguments about it. Arguments that they didn't have hundreds of years ago, but have only recently come up. And we're not going to get into that. But the story itself has a whole lot to tell us about our lives, our best lives with each other and with God. And for those of you who like superhero stories, I know there's a big one going on this weekend. This is the ultimate origin story. It's all of our origin story. So let's begin as a good story begins, and I'm going to paint a picture for you. Notice the pause there for suspense. Storytelling at its best. I want you to imagine the world as a large and barren plain right now. A great desert. There's nothing green to be seen. There are no grasses, no bushes or trees. There's been no rain yet. And in the midst of this sandy environment, this dry environment, there is everything in waiting. And there is one source of water, this mysterious source of water that winds through it. And in the Middle East, water was life. In some of the barren places, you watch water go through, and you see greenery on either side of it. But then it's desert beyond that, so that's life in this mysterious source. And God is there. And this isn't the God of Genesis 1, who my Old Testament professor says, that God scares me. Because that God just speaks the word and thing happens. He says, I can understand this God better because this God gets down into the dirt and gets his hands dirty. I can understand that. And here we are. God begins the work of an artist. Down there, he pushes aside the sand and he gets down to good clay. And he scoops up some of that clay. And he takes it over to the water and he softens it up so he can use the clay. And he gets to the divine potting wheel there and he starts to work. He starts to create and form. And in time, he gets this figure that he's creating to the point that he wants it to be. God says, this will do. And we have in the palm of his hand what would have been called an Adam, or an Adam, which means a human being in Hebrew. The CEB Storytelling Bible, which is a wonderful source for this sort of thing, suggests that we call this figure Dusty because Adam is just the name human. So if you want to give him a name, call him Dusty. I didn't get to a name for Eve, so I'm sorry. Anyway, once the figure is right in God's assessment, God breathes into the figure. And it goes from inert and useless clay to a living being. And God is pleased with this. And it seems to fire up the creative juices because God makes the person and then goes on a creative spree, really gets that wheel going, really digs up some clay there, and creates a beautiful garden in Eden. And Eden in Hebrew means pleasant. So this is a pleasant place that we're going to put our Dusty, our human, our Adam. And he puts him in the middle of this pleasant garden. And this is so fine, he says, I got to take this a step further. And he adds trees. And some of them are just beautiful trees. Other of them have all sorts of good food on them. He says, you can eat from those trees. They'll be good for you. But no tale is complete or interesting without some tension in it. So what do you suppose happens next that provides a little bit of tension and a little bit of suspense? Well, God creates two more trees. One of them is the tree of life. And it's in the garden there. It was there to help the human with life, issues of life. But then there's the other tree. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of the knowledge of everything, if you want it that way. I remember a time back in college where I was studying really hard and I walked through the library and I thought, man, I wish I just knew everything that was in here. It makes it so much easier. Right then I happened to be walking through a section on autopsy and murder. And I thought, well, maybe not. So here's the tree of knowledge of everything. He said, don't touch that. I don't want you going there. And so I'm going to give you a job now. And we see, we're going to digress here for a moment because there's a story within the story. You've got to go back to Genesis 1 for this one. And here's God, and he's having a conversation. Let us make humankind. Who is God speaking to? It's God talking to himself. I know I do that. No, the rabbis say, no, that's not God talking to himself. Although he could, 3 in 1 or all, but we won't get into that theology right now. But he says he's speaking with the angels. He says, with all the ministering angels. And there's a strong disagreement going on about whether or not human beings ought to be created. The angel of love likes the idea. He says all the acts of compassion those human beings will do, it'll be wonderful. Yes, make the humans. But the angel of truth is opposed. And, oh, come on, they lie so much. The angel of righteousness said, but they're going to do a lot of righteous deeds. This is a good thing. And the angel of peace says, they're going to get into fights and they're going to make war. And the angels get into a big argument about this. They've all got their points to make. They've all got valid points, and they get into a big fight about this, not watching what God is doing. And in the background, God fires up the potting wheel, and he just makes those people. And then he says to the angels, now you just hush. It's too late. It's done. Humans are a fact of life now. Get used to it. So, it's like that for us. God supports us. God breathes life into us. God sets us in pleasant places, gives us good things to eat, beauty all around us, and gives us something to do. God gives humanity a job. He says, look, you got this garden all around you. It's a beautiful place. I want you to farm or serve this garden. You're going to work here. You're going to take care of it. It also means you're going to guard it. And it's more than guarding it. Our Adam needs to work in the garden. And God gives him a challenge. Says, I want you to make this a better place than I gave to you. That's shocking. Really? Yeah. Get at it. Make it more interesting than I've made it for you. Now that's a job. And for obedience' sake, you stay away from that tree of the knowledge of everything. I don't want you messing with that right now. You see, God's like a new parent here. I understood this passage better when I had a child. And one day our son was about 4. We hadn't introduced him to the concept of death yet. And there was an ant lying on the ground. And me, the parent who didn't want Mike to know anything about death yet, he said, what's it doing? Because he's real short, he's down there low, he's, all hunched down looking at this thing just lying there. And I go, no, I don't want him eating from that tree of the knowledge of everything just yet. It's asleep. Yeah, I lied. I just flat out lied to him. But there was a 6-year-old girl next door. She's in that age where everything's about rules. And she hunkers down next to Mike. She goes, no, it's not. It's dead. It's not. It's sleeping. Making the big eyes and the stern voice that 6-year-olds don't get at all. No, it's not. It's dead. At which point I said in frustration, I know it's dead, but I don't want him to know that yet. So for the first time I understood what God was doing there. You're innocent right now. You're my little creation. And I'd like you to stay that way for a while. Please don't eat from that tree. Be innocent. Stay with me for a while. So, that's what God is doing here. And in God's creation, both humanity and the garden can't exist by themselves. They need each other. The garden needs to be worked. It needs intention. It needs care from us. And humanity can't survive without the harvest of the garden. We just can't do it. So we need each other. Humanity is permitted to enjoy the garden, to eat freely of it, with that one exception. And now we know, from this wonderful story, we know our purpose. We know that it requires us a concentrated effort from us to do it right. We also learn that joy comes from following God's will, God's plan and design for our lives, acting in a creative way, just like God was acting creatively. We are the image of God. We have the Spirit of God in us, and we are to create as well. That's part of our job. That's part of where we find our joy. And that's where we find God as well. When we get down to the dirt, when we get our hands dirty, when we get dirt under our nails, when we create. It's what we do when we till the land, when we pull the weeds, when we strip the overwintering vegetation, maintaining the garden, bringing life to it, and living from the harvest of it. That's being good stewards. And it's integral to our own well-being. And the pleasant places that we've been given by God won't remain so without our concentrated input, without our desire to stop overusing plastic and tossing it away, without throwing garbage into the sea and contaminating the groundwater. We won't have a pleasant garden much longer if we keep that up. From the story so far, we get the point. God continues to provide pleasant places, promising new ones, and calls humanity to work them, collaborating with God in obedience for the proper unfolding of the divine purpose. We do it together, us and God, creator and created. In the story, did our Adam, the one made from the earth to protect the earth, was he obedient to following that calling? Are we today? Now we have a moment of levity before things turn really serious. I've always enjoyed this part. This is good storytelling here. God realizes it's not good for our human to be alone. He says there's nobody to help tend this human being. He needs a helpmate. We've got to do something about that. So God fires out the divine potter's wheel again, digs up some more clay, and he starts creating. And God says, okay, I'm going to make animals, birds, everything on the earth. And come here, Dustin. I'm going to bring everything past you. I want you to name it. And I want you to see if anywhere in here is a good partner for you. This is like the weirdest version of The Bachelor I've ever heard of. I've just seen him standing there with a rose. No. And imagine this. It's going to get interesting here, because here's this individual looking at all these animals. Oh, that's a dog, that's a pig, that's a goat, that's a cow. You know, okay, fine. Then things get a little scarier. Oh, that's a lion and a tiger and a bear, oh my. And they look hungrily back at him. And he says, these are not partners for me, no, God, please. And God thinks about that, he goes, this isn't going the way I had thought. We have suffered a setback here, and that's all right. We'll try something else. That's something good for us to think about too. So, we have some divine anesthetic that's used here. Our individual is knocked out. And so I'm going to create a helpmate from you. Flesh of your flesh, bone of your bone. And you know what? I'm not going to create that helpmate from your head because I don't want that individual dominating you. And I'm not creating it from your foot because I don't want you dominating that individual. It's side by side here. Companion. Equal. That's what I want. That's the divine plan here. And when our Dusty wakes up, he sees Eve. I like what one pastor said. He said he got up and he said, "Wow, man!" Woman. And for the very first time in his life, he was complete. He understood something had been missing. And he never quite understood himself either until he saw his reflection in somebody else. Now I know me, and now I know you a little bit better. So there's joy in the midst of the garden. And now we have a helpmate. But now we go from joy and a little bit of amusement to tragedy. Because they tend for the garden, but they don't tend well enough. They can't protect it sufficiently because in comes this one creature. No legs, no arms, the snake. I'm not saying that all snakes are like this, but this is one special snake. It comes in and it doesn't offer them anything. Not like God. He can't say, so look, I'll make something for you here. It just comes in and says, you know what? You're not going to die if you eat from that tree, the knowledge of everything. God won't do that to you. It'll be fine. Go ahead. Try it. Well, and say, you don't have to trust what God told you. Trust me. This is going to be all right. So there's no creativity in this. There's no positive result from it. This is a plan on the snake's part to obstruct God's plan, to thwart God's will, to defy obedience. and to create mistrust, to sow the seeds of mistrust between God and humanity, or between humanity and God, actually, by eating this fruit of the tree of knowledge of everything. And for the first time, these human beings know shame. They discover they're physically and psychologically naked. They know fear because mistrust has been sown in them. Between them and God, they hide from God, from their Creator, and they know blame. Because here's Dusty throws his partner under the bus. She's the one that got me to do it. And she blames the snake. He's the one that did it. The snake's the one that got me to do it. They stray far from God's plan for innocent relations between God and humanity, and they've replaced that with a fear that we'll see throughout the Scriptures, marring human history point after point after point. But God does not abandon humanity as a result, but sets them down and tells them it's going to get harder now that you know what you know. You're not going to be able to work the land so easily. There will be thistles and weeds competing with your plants, and everything you create is going to be a lot harder to create for the both of you. But there's an act of compassion here at the end, and so you're going to have to leave the garden. The tree of life will not be available to you, meaning you will not have to live forever with this mistake that you have made. And he said, and now, before you go, those fig leaves are such a mistake. Let me show you about clothes. One last good thing before they moved on to harder lives. And so we can draw close to God by repenting of our sinful ways. When we make mistakes, we say, look, I made a mistake. I'm sorry about that. I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to change the way I do things. You turn around, you change, you go walking towards God's way of doing things, and you shuck fear out of your life like it's rotten fruit. Because that's what it is. Turn your life around. We call to change ourselves back towards the original plan, towards being good stewards, tilling and tending and guarding the land, making it a pleasant place with hard work, working together to get it done, helping each other along the way as Adam and Eve helped each other in mutual love and respect. It's stewardship with dirty fingernails, dirty knees and sweaty brows. It's understanding the cycles of life and our place in it. Working hard for the earth and the earth responding in kind, understanding how both need each other. I recently saw a little article about people raising chickens. This is becoming more popular. There's a family that does this here where my father lives. That caused kind of an uproar. This is a very wealthy neighborhood, but they're doing it anyway. It's going well. But people are finding there's a problem with raising chickens. Of course, chickens have eggs, and that's a great thing. You can have eggs for your table, but if you care for the chickens and you've got enough of them, they create a whole lot of eggs, and before long you're trying to give them away or put them in bags and drop them in open car windows. Nature responds in kind when you are kind to nature. This is way back towards God. Towards right relationship with each other and with the world. And Leviticus takes it one more step farther. It says, okay, now look, I don't want you to be completionist about things. I don't want you to pluck every last grain out of your fields. I don't want you to get every grape. If something falls on the ground, leave it there, because you've got to leave something behind for those people who don't have anything. They got to eat. And those people that are strangers in your land, they need to eat too. Leave that stuff in the field for them. Help them out, so that everybody has a little sweeter life. It's the way back towards God. And Princeton Seminary has a program now called Scripture and Food. It's a working garden where they observe life lived in God's way. In the 20th century, we strayed. We had the factory style for learning. Set everybody down in little chairs, feed them facts, and get them to regurgitate them rather than seeing how things work out in the world. We're leaving behind nature, losing ourselves and losing the pleasures that we found, and losing God in the process. The snake is still at work. Seeds are being sown. So, on the farm, they learn about innovation and creativity, which depends on the ability to take risks and to endure failure, just as God did there with the whole first idea of a partner. And moving on. And it works for farming, it works for ministry, it works in our everyday lives together. Shared work, shared food, it creates closeness, a tighter community, just like God desires. That's why we're having a potluck next week. Because people tell better stories when they're pitching in and helping each other and all eating together. God wants us to serve and preserve our world, making the pleasant garden, improving on what we were given.